So this is a story about a fox, and not a red fox, mind you, but a gray fox. See, a lot of people don't know this, but here in New England, red foxes are not native to this area. They were actually brought over by the Europeans for hunting purposes. But the gray fox, that fox, is actually the native species for here in Vermont. And there was this little gray fox who made his den inside like the hollowed out stump of an old maple tree that had long since fallen over. It wasn't a spectacular home by any stretch of the imagination. It was rather simple. It was kind of humble. It was pretty small. But for this little gray fox, this maple tree stump made for a decent home, and it protected it from the elements and kept it relatively safe. And the gray fox had actually staked out a relatively stable existence for himself here on our farm in the far back reaches, far away from the farm animals. The fox kept mostly to himself, didn't really bother any of the birds down in the farm, and stayed pretty far away from the livestock guardian dogs that patrolled the farm. And for the most part, this little gray fox would wander the pastures and woods looking for mice and voles and other tiny rodents that it could turn into its meals. And while the fox wasn't like an incredible hunter or anything, it did pretty well for itself and wasn't ever really going hungry for any long periods of time. And so overall, this little gray fox had a pretty good existence as far as fox life can go. And as the weather started to get colder and the days started to get shorter, the fox was realizing that the winter time was going to be a decent time for it to rest and relax. And while foxes don't actually hibernate like other animals, they kind of lay low a little bit more, and they'll still go out and hunt. And because a fox will hunt for mice, usually it can find a mouse here or there out in the wild and make it a meal all the way through the winter months. And so again, as far as fox life can go for foxes in Vermont, this little gray fox was doing pretty darn well. But despite this fact, the little gray fox was kind of unhappy. The little gray fox was feeling like his house underneath the little old maple tree stump was kind of shabby. He was getting kind of bored with having to eat these rodents every single day, and he might have wanted something more interesting and more exotic to munch on. And he was also kind of resentful for the fact that he would have to go out in the snowy months and look for his food versus being able to sleep quietly and peacefully and not have to deal with all that snow. And so that was the mindset that this little fox was in as he was out one day looking for food, and he stumbled upon an old, worn-out Canada goose. And this Canada goose was not looking too good. He was looking really skinny. He was missing a whole heck of a lot of feathers. And he was all alone. And so the little gray fox approached the Canada goose and asked him what he was doing. Us geese are unable to stay here like you foxes year-round, and so we're always on the move. No place is ever truly our home, and we're constantly in search of our next meal and a place to go to eat that next meal. The rest of my flock has flown on without me, and I just stopped here to rest for a few minutes, and I hope I'm going to be able to catch up with them so that I can stick with them and find that next patch of green grass. The little gray fox said, "Gosh, mister, I'm really sorry that you never have a home and you're constantly on the move and all of your friends and family have left you here. Do you mind if I eat you?" And the old Canada goose shot right up and smacked the gray fox with his wing, and he fluttered off, yelling, "Heck no, little fox, you're not going to eat me. I'm going to fly onward." And with those words, the goose took off into the air and was honking and soaring towards greener pastures. Now, the little gray fox was dazed and confused from the smack that he took from the goose, and so he picked himself up and dusted himself off and kept walking onward, looking for some more mice or anything else he could possibly eat. And so he had his little fox nose very low to the ground, and he was sniffing around when suddenly a giant hoof smashed down right in front of his face. Startled, the little gray fox stepped backwards and looked upwards, and what he saw was a gigantic bull moose. And now I don't know if you guys have ever seen a bull moose in person, but the most amazing thing about a moose, like a real live moose that you see in person, is just how large it is. Like, it doesn't seem real. Like, one time I was walking around here on the farm and I walked right into a big moose. And when I saw it for the first moment or two, I was just so scared I didn't even move because it just looked too gosh darn big to be alive. And when that little gray fox was looking up at that gigantic bull moose with its gigantic rack of antlers, all it could actually do is give a startled little yelp. And the big bull moose saw the gray fox there. "Oh, sorry there, buddy. I didn't see you there on the ground. I'm just out here looking for branches and trees that I can eat. And it takes a lot of branches and a lot of needles and a lot of leaves to feed a big old moose like myself." And the little gray fox heard this and he was kind of stunned. He said, "You mean to tell me that a big giant like yourself exists solely off things like those pine needles over there?" And the big old bull moose nodded and took a giant bite of some pine needles just above the gray fox's head. And then the little gray fox thought, gosh, there might be something to eating those pine needles. And he took a bite of them himself and tried it and immediately spit it out. Because pine needles are kind of disgusting to eat. And even though mice aren't the best thing in the world, they definitely taste a lot better than the pine needles. And so the little gray fox kind of shook his head and watched as the moose lumbered off, and the little gray fox started to walk off in another direction. And now for a few more hours, the little gray fox wandered around looking for food, looking for something interesting, and looking for something to break up his boredom and monotony, when suddenly he found a cave. And this cave was in the deepest, darkest part of the forest, a spot that the little gray fox had never been to before. And when the little gray fox sniffed, he picked up the scent of something interesting. So he carefully and stealthily crept into the cave to see what was in there. And he walked deeper and deeper into the cave. And as he kept going deeper and deeper in, the smell started to get stronger and stronger. And then suddenly he heard a massive roar. "Who dares enter my cave?" It was a big old black bear sow, and she looked angry. The little fox jumped back, terrified of what he realized he had done. He had inadvertently stumbled into a cave that belonged to a black bear, and she did not seem happy, and he was worried that it might be his last few moments as a little gray fox. And he'd probably be spending the rest of his short time on Earth as a meal for a black bear, and eventually turning into black bear poop. It was definitely not the way he wanted it all to end. Not quite sure what to do, the little gray fox rolled over onto his back and showed the black bear his belly, and in his most supplicating voice possible, he said, "Please don't eat me, Lady Black Bear. I was just looking for mice to eat." And the black bear snorted, "I would never eat a creature like you. Fox meat tastes disgusting, so don't worry, I'm not gonna eat you, but I want you to get out of my cave." And with those words, the little gray fox rolled back onto his feet and started to slowly walk backwards out of the cave. But before he got too far away, the black bear said one more thing to him. "You know, you must be very lucky. I'm pregnant and I'm about to have some cubs, and we're gonna have to spend all winter in this den. And I'm very worried that I didn't get enough food because I'm not gonna eat for several months. During my hibernation, I have to let all the food I ate this past summer keep both me and my cubs alive. And because of the flooding we had this year, there weren't a lot of apples or acorns or beech nuts, and so I'm still hungry." The little gray fox heard this, and he got kind of sad. Like he felt really bad for the black bear. Like she was gonna have to go such a long time without food. And here he was able to go outside anytime he wanted to go find a little mouse to eat. And so as the little gray fox was leaving the black bear's cave, he started to realize just how lucky he actually was. Sure, his little den in the maple tree was modest and not anything fancy, but it kept him warm and he had a place that he could call home, unlike the old goose. And sure, he could get bored eating mice and voles every single day, but at least it didn't taste as terrible as the pine needles that the moose had to eat. And sure, he wasn't a big fan of having to go out into the snow looking for food in the dead of winter, but at least it was better than the black bear, who was worried if she and her cubs were even going to survive the whole winter because it had been such a tough summer. And so with an overwhelming sense of gratitude, the little gray fox headed back to his home and had really a sense of being thankful for all of the things that he had versus wishing for the things that he didn't have, because he realized that compared to a lot of other creatures out there, he had it pretty gosh darn good. And just as he had that thought, he saw a little tiny mouse scurrying across the pasture, and he locked in on it and made one big leap towards it and pounced on it and caught it under his paw, and he pulled back his head about ready to eat it, when suddenly the little mouse peeped up and said, "Please, Mr. Fox, don't eat me. I'm just a little mouse. Can you please take pity on me?" And the gray fox looked down at the mouse and thought for a brief moment of all of the things he was grateful for and all of the lessons that the other animals had taught him that day. And he opened up his mouth and he swallowed the mouse down in one big gulp. Because nature can be cruel, and sometimes life just works out that way.